Given by my advocate on the trade embargo in Cuba, who claimed the embargo on Cuba works against the interests of the United States. He used three supporting claims, which was 1, the embargo on Cuba works against the interests of the United States. 2, the embargo is bad for the Cuban people rather than the Cuban government as intended. And 3, the embargo has failed to achieve its original goals. So I'm going to tell you why the advocate said it's inaccurate or fails to give us a reason that there's actually a problem with the embargo in place. So just so you guys know, on February 3rd, 1962, the embargo went into effect. Jay Cox from CNBC.com kind of just reminds us of the enormous pile of American assets that Fidel Castro seized in the process of nationalizing the Cuban economy. The confiscated property translated to nearly $7 billion today, assets like sugar factories, mines, and oil refineries. The seize of U.S. assets is classified as the largest uncompensated taking of American property by a foreign government in history. So my advocate's first claim was the embargo is bad for the U.S. economy. He used points to enhance his argument with points like lost profits and jobs being prevented, which this basically asserts that America just cares about money and jobs, which if that is the case, a writer from CNBC again talks about how U.S. created 227,000 jobs in January, 2.6 million jobs added in 2017, and 2.24 million jobs created in 2016. So we're almost creating about 200,000 jobs per month. So regardless of Cuba, we're not having a problem creating jobs. And so we're not really struggling in that area. So I don't necessarily thinking about bringing about taking away an embargo just for the idea of 12,000 jobs is necessary. So we have to put it into a context like that when we're thinking of something that's very important. So my advocate's second claim states that the embargo is bad for the Cuban people rather than the Cuban government as intended. So actually, procon.org, the Cuban people, states that the Cuban people's suffering is a direct choice of the Cuban government being unwilling to deal with America in regards to these issues. So like issues like human rights, economic consequences, and the denial of certain traditional relationships. So we like we would like the idea that people could actually travel freely and that they can actually not be prisoners of an island kept somewhere. And these ideas are just not in the idea of the Cuban government. So procon.org also speaks about the Cuban people supporting the embargo. So that gets to speaking about removing it, but their own people are saying that it's better for it to stay. And that they would be even more oppressed than they already are, and that the Cuban government would be the only ones to actually benefit from lifting this embargo. In 2016, NBC News reported to further add to value to my point. It's the corrupt system, not the embargo, which deprives the people of Cuba of the benefits of trade and skill of their work. They actually continued to talk about a visit that President Obama did during his presidency, that hours before he actually landed, the Cuban people were just doing a protest like anyone does, even around in our area, and there were actually 50 of them who were marching demanding for human rights that were actually arrested. So the Washington Post follows up with this by claiming that Fidel Castro later kind of delivered a speech dismissing everything Obama said, just kind of making fun of the idea, so it's like no point. History News Network states the Cuban people actually want the embargo tightened. So my advocate also claims in his secondary claim that the embargo prevents medicine from being used in Cuba and the outright ban of the sale of American food. In fact, that's not true because the Cuban Democracy Act in Section 1705C of the Medicine and Medical Supplies states that exports of medicines or medical supplies, instruments, or equipment to Cuba shall not be restricted. So that just kind of negates that again. So it's just kind of a lot of these flaws in this area. So unless, and again, so there's a restriction, unless they're to be used for torture or for profit gains, which we would hope that's not the case. Jay Benitez, a writer for the U.S. News, states that embargo allows for U.S. food and humanitarian. So back to the food topic, it's basically saying that the U.S. Allows for U.S. food and humanitarian supplies to be sold to Cuba. In fact, U.S. currently is the 5th largest exporter to Cuba. So again, it's negating what he previously claimed. So his final claim, the embargo has failed to achieve its original goals. I challenge this evidence and reasoning with just basically a simple reminder that basically the embargo is also there. He also claimed his 3 points that he uses as examples were almost proving the opposite of what he was trying to say. So it actually, what he used as far as like reducing the threat posed by the alignment of the present government, that it's been in place for 50, 60 years and there's still no democracy and Cuba doesn't have any threat on the US. He actually provides that there's a reason for this embargo to stay into place. And so it gives us leverage that, this embargo in place kind of gives us this leverage to kind of keep everything in order. So an example of this idea of the threats, there's a man named Che Guevara. The Castro government was basically using him to export this idea of revolution. And so he was basically Castro's right-hand man and sent out to start an uproar revolution. So R. Carroll from TheGuardian.com basically says his supporters have taken advantage of teachings and started rebellions in other countries. So the goal, ending the embargo on the Castro regime would be a blow to basically our wallets as well as American values. That's another threat in itself. The American people want free trade with free people, not manipulated trade that strengthens an authoritarian government. So in conclusion, the idea of the embargo is we have a bit of control, and without it, more than what already is taking place as far as mayhem goes would ensue even rapidly. And so my advocate states that the embargo on Cuba works against the interests of the United States, but the history has shown that Cuba does not want to function in the world with us. Thank
you. All right. The structure of the advocate's arguments laid out pretty well. You give us a nice context at the beginning, reminding us about what it was that was going on when the embargo was put into place. I think that gives, kind of helps us realize that there is a lot more to this than just the idea that we don't like Castro, that there's some economic interest going on there. I thought that you did a good job diminishing the jobs argument, suggesting that our economy is thriving, we're creating lots of jobs, and the idea that we drop this embargo in order to get 12,000 jobs is, not particularly pressing given the amount of job creation that was happening in the economy right now. On the second argument about the people rather than the government, you've got a couple of good points here. You mentioned that the Cuban people would prefer to keep it this way. I think your source needs to be quoting directly there. It sounds like it's a paraphrase rather than a direct quote, but I like the idea there. There's one point at which you suggest they're afraid that without the U.S. pressure, things would be worse in Cuba for them, and I think that really would make your argument a lot stronger. There's a lot of information on that second point. You've got good evidence that you're citing in a number of places here. You've got this story about how the Cuban government really ignores human rights. So you've got the example when Obama was there. I thought that was pretty effective. And then all of the stuff that says, look, the law says that we can sell medicine to them, and that kind of thing. So I don't know what it is they're talking about. It's we're back to this is the Cuban government again using us as their boogeyman to try and maintain their power that's going on. And then I thought the third point was pretty responsive. I think you could use a little bit more development of that argument. I do think that there should be some criticism of the grounds that the advocate used a little bit more, but I thought that your reasoning processes and your counterclaims were very solid. All right, thank you.